In this video, we are going to talk about cultural interactions between East and West during antiquity. Antiquity is commonly perceived as an era where cultural interactions and knowledge of one another were restricted to only a small portion of the world by society or cultural center. For example, in Europe, we study mostly this period through the eyes of the Roman Empire or ancient Greece, and the most eastern rest studied is ancient Mesopotamia, located in actual Iraq. However, it doesn't mean other civilizations did not exist yet, and we have archaeological and written sources emanating from Japan or China, for example. The question here raised is the following: what did these civilizations know of each other? What were their cultural interactions? Do we have traces of it, and which ones? And how can it change the vision we have of antiquity and its vision of the world? Although we cannot speak of globalization regarding antiquity because of the lack of knowledge of large areas of the earth, such as European settlers ignoring the very existence of the American continent, a lot of historians have tried to examine the period following a perspective of connected history, which tries to focus on intercultural connections and mutual influence, and decentralize the way we tend to look at history through the eyes of one specific culture, whether it is Eastern or Western. So, what did the civilizations of antiquity know of each other? I intend to focus mainly on the Roman Empire, simply because it would take a really long time to explore the whole of interactions between ancient peoples throughout history. However, the Greeks, as well as other civilizations, were in contact with Eastern peoples, and to give an example, there even was a Greek Bactrian kingdom in the north of actual India. Anyway, let's get to the point. The first thing to say is that the Roman Empire has a pretty wide knowledge of its surroundings and of the world on an almost global scale. Its own extent of sovereignty is quite large over Europe, North Africa and Middle East, but the Romans also know territories which are very far away from their homeland, such as Iceland, the western and eastern coasts of Africa, but Asian lands as well, with the Scythes, China under the ruling of the Han Dynasty, India and other powers as well. This knowledge came to them and to us through the tales of many previous explorers, mainly Greek and Roman. We can here think of the Massilian, actual Marseille, Greek explorer Pytheas, who went north towards what we consider to be Iceland, and whose story is known by other writers, such as Strabo or Pliny the Elder, a Roman general naturalist known for his natural history, which is a sum of a lot of ancient knowledge, including the world and its extents, but also the civilization inhabiting it. Pliny's work also shows us what were the ways for Eastern civilizations and the Romans to meet each other. There were both overland routes and maritime ones, which were mostly used for commercial transactions and the traffic of economical goods, which could then be sold in Rome or in India's or China's main cities. Even though he never went to India himself, Pliny is also about the first and main market of China, Mutirus, which would nowadays be on the western coast of India, and describes us the way to get there by ship. The overland routes, however, rather connected the Roman Empire to northern China and its dependencies. They are today remembered through the vague idea of the Silk Road, which refers to the trade of silk from China to the Roman Empire, and later the whole of Europe, as Marco Polo's writings suggest. But nowadays, historians think that the expression is a bit too simplistic, because it erases the fact that there were numerous go-betweens between Roman traders and Chinese producers, and they also argue that the silk didn't have its own specific trade routes, which would be different from other products. In fact, what is interesting is that the difference between those overland routes and maritime routes is shown on ancient maps. Northern China is labeled Sarika, the people through which most of the Romans got their silk, whereas southern China is labeled Sina, and they were seen as two separate countries, even though both were ruled by the Han Dynasty. So, now that we have a clear idea of the ways Eastern and Western antique civilizations could meet each other and have interactions, the big question is, what traces do we have of it? To begin with, we have several archaeological traces of Chinese products in place which were ruled by the Roman Empire. Look at this piece of silk, which was found in the vestiges of the city of Palmyra, in actual Syria. Palmyra was the main point of exchange and was sort of at the crossroads of Eastern and Western civilizations, so it's not surprising that a piece of Chinese silk was found here. But what we can notice is how the design is a mix of Roman and Chinese influences, which shows how both cultures might have influenced each other. Also, The common idea is to think, because of the idea of a Silk Road, that silk was mainly a product of trade only. But silk in ancient China was also a major political tool, because it was produced in high quantities to be used as a gift to the vassal kingdoms defeated in the previous centuries. It is also used as a diplomatic gift to foreign powers, which include the Roman Empire. And according to archaeologists, that would be the main way of introduction of silk products into the empire, whereas the trade of silk will only be a consequence of these large amounts of silk circulating in the Chinese territory. We also have mentions of China in Roman written works, as we said earlier, but the reverse is true. Chinese ancient texts mention the Roman Empire several times as well, under the name Daqin, which literally means Big China, and even events we know from the Roman sources as well. For example, Marcus Aurelius, named Andon in the text, sent an embassy to Emperor Huan around 166 of Common Era, and the event is told even several centuries later by a chronicle named Fannie in his Hu Han Shu, History of the Later Han. This text tells us many things on the way both powers considered each other. Whereas the Roman Empire is viewed in the West as a sort of supreme ruler, which holds a large territorial, political and economical power, Fannie and his contemporaries could not think of any motive for the embassy but to pay tribute to the Han Emperor. Therefore, both powers thought to be the dominant ruler of the world. We don't have many information on what the Romans exactly knew of China, but chronicles such as Fannie's, which we just mentioned, tell us a lot on what the Chinese knew of Daqin. When we read his texts, we discover that he has a mostly accurate vision of some elements of the Roman Empire, even without understanding the whole of it. For example, he describes the cursus publicus, which is the postal system, the way the Roman emperors don't succeed in the form of dynasties. He knows that the Roman Empire dominates several other kingdoms and city-states, although he might overestimate the number, and he knows of the Senate, but there he underestimates the number of senators, counting 36 when they actually were about 300. Of course, there are still some elements of pure fantasy. He says that imperial buildings had columns made out of rock crystal, but Roman emperors were not that rich, but the accuracy of some parts of his account remains impressive. I think that these accounts and archaeological traces lead us to reconsider the vision we nowadays commonly have of antiquity as a time where different peoples were not in contact with each other. The focus on these interactions offers really interesting and new perspectives in historical studies, and I'm looking forward to the next works on this topic. I hope this short overview of the links between East and West in the ancient world inspired you to dig deeper into this question, or at least gave you some food for thought.